So welcome everybody. We are here happy to listen to Isabelle Guérin about her latest book, The Embedded Woman. The presentation is recorded and then will be available on our YouTube page. So Isabelle, we don't wait any longer and the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Marcella, for this invitation. I'm very excited by this mixed audience coming from very diverse disciplines. So what I'm going to do is to present some of the most salient findings of this recently published book, The Indebted Woman, Kinship, Sexuality and Capitalism, which I have co-written with two Indian colleagues, Santosh Kumar and Venkata Subramanian. So let me start with a question. If I ask you, according to you, who are the main players in finance? What comes to mind? Well, when I ask the question to my students, quite commonly, the very first thing that comes to their mind is a very well-known film, The Wolf of Wall Street. You may remember Leonardo DiCaprio, who was playing a young golden boy who made a ton of money before he turned 30 because of his drive, charisma, and talent for predicting and bargaining. As you may know, this was one of Martin Scorsese's best-selling films. You may also think about The Big Short, another hit movie. I don't know whether you've seen this movie. You can see a math genius, real estate fan who spends all day jamming to heavy metal and making predictions. Another example of a very wealthy white guy. And those films show how people currently think about finance. And the fact that finance would be a matter of white men, well-educated, living in big cities like New York or London. And you can see them working as investment bankers or hedge fund managers, financial analysts, brokers. They spend all day crunching numbers, predicting the future, making deals, using complicated math and algorithms. And we think that they huge paychecks must mean that they are really good in what they do, and that they have very mad skills in math and risk taking. They are visionaries and they can handle pressure. And in those images, women are hardly ever seen, or when they are, it's usually in less important roles or just as eye candy. Well, this is the top of the pyramid. And let's take a look at the bottom of the pyramid instead of the top, where you'll find the masses of ordinary people who keep the financial machine running. And what we see, and this is what we're looking at in this book, is a completely different picture. And it's no longer the financial analyst or the hedge fund manager, but rather the indebted woman. So the main point of our book is that the indebted woman, I'm going to describe in detail who is this indebted woman. The idea is that this indebted woman has a crucial role in today's financial capitalism. And she's usually overlooked, except by a small group of feminist experts. I'm thinking in particular of feminist researchers, mainly with a political economy approach, such as Silvia Federici, Veronica Gago, Adrienne Roberts, and others. So of course, our work builds on and extend this body of research. And if I had to sum up our arguments in 2 words, in case I lose you or in case my presentation gets confusing, I would say that the indebted woman is a key figure in financial capitalism, because without her and without a very hard everyday work of managing family debt, without the various skills required for this work, and also without her strong sense of ethics and guilt, which is deeply ingrained in her identity as a woman, financial capitalism simply wouldn't work. Well, so this is the essence of the book. Now let me come to the main argument. First, where do we talk, and what kind of method have we been using? I'm an economist. I'm trained as an economist. So as an economist, I like to measure things. So we have conducted survey over time. As you remember, my two colleagues are Indian. So the core of our argument is based on the South Indian case. But as I will say later, we also compare the Indian case with other places and other time of history to try to generalize beyond the Indian case. So coming back to the method, so 20 years of fieldwork in rural Tamil Nadu. And first, like I was just saying earlier, as an economist, I like to measure things. So we have been conducting surveys over time, what we call panel data. And the objective was to measure the amount of debt and how it has grown over time. So with around 400, 500 households, the same household surveyed 2010, 2016, 2020, 21. Men and women surveyed separately. Ethnography was key and was very crucial to capture the intimacy of debt and how it articulates with very close relationship, including sex, something we were not expecting at the beginning, but which really stood out from women's stories. Financial diaries, which is all about tracking the money coming in and out of a household. And this method has been used for a while to show how complicated the financial lives of poor people are. We have taken it a step further by breaking down the data by gender, something that surprisingly very few colleagues have done before. Collecting data raises a number of ethical questions. I can come back to this in the discussion if you want. And last pointed method, I already mentioned it, but I mention it again. The book really uses the Tamil Nadu case as a demonstration, but we also really want to take our readers on a journey through time and space. And the idea was really to identify both specificity and recurring features, with the result that the indebted woman is by no means limited to the Tamil case, but we argue that the indebted woman is a recurring feature of capitalist economy, albeit in very diverse forms. And this diversity is crucial in helping us to think about the future of the indebted woman. I will come back to this in the conclusion. Before going to the main results, maybe let me start with very concrete examples, 3 real life examples to really help us to understand what's going on. So let's start with, I bring you in Panditur, a Tamil village in South India. And let's talk about Pushpurani. That's not her real name. When we first met her in 2004, she was in her 40s at the time. She belonged to the Dalit caste, which is at the bottom of the caste hierarchy, the ex-untouchable people. She got married very early. She has 2 children. She can barely read and write. In the past, she would borrow a small amount of money from neighbors and friends, but in 2004, she took out her first official loan from a local NGO, 3,000 rupees, which was about 35 euros back then, equivalent to a third of her family's average monthly income. Last time I met her, 2022, her outstanding debt amounted to around 800,000 rupees, something like 9,000 euros. She feels overwhelmed by debt, she says, due to the many credit offers she now has access to. She has stopped her small trading activities. How could I? She said. I spend all my time managing and rotating debt. And it's true that he's constantly juggling between 10 to 20 loans at a time from financial companies, some of which are now listed on the stock exchange, as well as loans from informal moneylenders, local elites, neighbors, friends, and so forth. She used those loans mostly to pay for groceries, medical expenses, her husband's phone internet subscription, her son's wedding, home renovation. And contrary to stereotypes about the financial illiteracy of the poor, her daily life is like managing a real investment portfolio. It requires a very deep understanding of the market, analyzing very different financial flows, how the values change time, all this intuitively, because she doesn't know how to write and read. Negotiations are also crucial, but here, her parts from the usual financial norms, and she needs to maintain her dignity, she needs to assert herself, to take care of her appearance, dress, posture, and attitude, to present herself as a very strong woman capable of repaying her debt. And at the same
Isabelle,
time,
excuse me if I stop you, but we didn't hear you very well for a while.
Oh.
So if you don't mind, just switch off the video. Maybe it will
Oh.
improve the connection
Okay.
until we see the slide, of course.
Yeah. That's very bad.
Okay, I'll do that for you. Don't worry. I will switch off your video just for that reason, eh?
Tell me if is it better like this?
Yeah, no. We see the slide very well. I'm just switching off your video, so we will not see your face, but just for a while, in order to improve the connection. That's all. I do it directly.
Yeah, but I've changed the sound system. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, much better now.
Much better?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay. So coming back to my, I was talking about this lady as a very concrete example of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the indebted woman. And I was saying that, yeah, one of the skills she has to deploy to maintain her creditworthiness is to appear as a strong woman, but also to be friendly, charming, sometimes even resorting to sex, but without damaging her reputation as a respectable wife in a society that is becoming increasingly conservative. Now let me quickly give two other cases. Maybe I'm going to skip this because time is going. Initially I wanted to give you two other examples from Senegal and France, just to show you that this figure of the indebted woman, which is on the one hand crushed by debt, and at the same time always trying to maintain her dignity, trying to avoid shame, trying to maintain her reputation as a good woman. This is the common point between these three examples. And the idea here is that we, despite very different contexts, different histories, economies, culture, we have a common topic that has obsessed me for the past 20 years, the indebtedness of working class and subaltern women, which is vital, which is crucial for family survival, while being deeply ingrained in their bodies, in their flesh, their feelings, emotions, and their duties as mothers, wives, and sometimes co-wives. And this was the case in Senegal where I did fieldwork some 15 years. And the reason why my two colleagues and I have embarked on this book is that not many people seem to care, except for a few select groups, as a feminist I was talking about earlier. We do know that household debt continues to rise, and you can see the trend on this graph. We have so-called advanced economies on the top. We have emerging economies at the bottom. The thing is that you may think that the percentage of debt to GDP is much higher in so-called advanced economies. That's true, but you have to keep in mind that in emerging economies, very few people have mortgages. So the ratio you see on the screen is mostly about consumption loans. And the other thing is that informal and unregulated debts are usually not taken into account, even though they can make up a very significant part of the total. In rural Tamil Nadu, informal debt still represents an average 80% of household debt. And what is fascinating and really disappointing, is that you can find a number of reports. I have in mind, for instance, in 2019, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development raised the alarm about the rise of private debt, but nothing was said about gender. And this is partly because there are no official statistics. As we all know, if something isn't counted, it does not count. And the problem we face here is that in most available statistics, women's debt is grouped together with the spouse debt, like they are a complete package. So in many cases, the only statistics we have is about single mothers and female students. And yet, men and women often do not have access to the same source of borrowing. They don't borrow for the same reasons. They use different assets to build up their creditworthiness, and they don't repay the same way or for the same reasons. And our first argument is the fact that there is a sexual division of debt. In the same way that there is a division of labor, there is a division of debt that cuts across time and place. So what do we mean by that? We mean, first, specific debt sources, and with working class and subaltern women who often have to rely on expensive, degrading, and sometimes predatory loans, pawning, department store credit cards, microcredit, we can come back to this in the discussion. Payday lending, which is quite common in the US or in the UK, subprime mortgages. We know now that subprime mortgages were primarily targeting women, and especially colored women. The second aspect of the sexual division of debt is repayment as a female task. Managing overdue bills, dealings with bailiff and debt collectors, answering calls from collection agencies, seeking help from neighbors, facing disapproval, contempt, humiliation, sometimes insult from lenders. In a number of contexts, it has been shown that this is mostly a female task. And the last aspect of the sexual division of debt is the corporality of female debt. The fact that women's bodies and sexuality are often at stake. I will come back to more details on later. In our Tamil case, the sexual division of debt means few things. The first one is that women debt is disproportionate in relation to their incomes. So here figures are quite helpful. As the debt to income ratio, as you can see on the screen, is much higher for the poorest, but it's also much higher for women. It also means a specialization in microcredit, pawnbroking, door-to-door lending. It also means a specialization in repayment. This is a key finding that came out from the financial diary methods. As you can see on the screen, I've taken 4 cases. You might think that men help their wives repay the debt, but the opposite is true, in fact. It is much more common for women to pay off their husband's debt, while the reverse is very uncommon. So, first argument, sexual division of debt, which takes various forms, specific borrowing sources, burden of repayment, corporality of debt. Now let me turn to the second argument, debt, work, and capitalism. And remember the subtitle of the book, Sexuality, Kinship, and Capitalism. So let me start with capitalism. And the argument here is to say that if the indebted woman is a crucial part of capitalism, it's because of her debt work. In a context where debt flows are as significant or even higher than income flows, this is the case in South India, but it's also the case in many contexts, managing debt becomes a task in itself. It becomes a task in itself with repetitive and time-consuming tasks, specific skills, and it creates value. And this is a definition of work. So the first thing, managing debt takes time. So here again, I'm not going to enter into the details of this very complicated table, but from financial diaries data, we have been able to count how much transactions men and women do every week. And we can see very clearly that on average, women perform anywhere from 1 to 10 transactions per week, financial transactions, while for men, it's hardly more than 4. Right. Managing debt is complex. Remember, this Pushpurani was talking about juggling debt. I borrow from Marcella to pay back Valentina, and then I borrow from Valentina to pay back Cesar, and so forth. So you can look at this graph, which also comes from the financial diary methods. And you can see the loan E in the middle, borrowed from a moneylender, and to pay back this loan E, the woman had to to borrow from P, AB, AN, etc., and to pay back P, she had to borrow from D and A at T, and etc. And this juggling process has two critical implications. The first one is very complex management, as women manage many loans at once, and also the accumulation of costs. I will give you figures in a minute. And all this juggling process also require very specific cognitive skills and especially memory skills. Remember that most of those practices keep account. So they have to keep everything in their mind, and they have to develop specific memory techniques and to remember how much and the temporalities and the prices and so forth. Coming back to capitalism, managing debt contributes to capitalism in different ways. First, it helps families stay financially afloat, filling in the gaps left by private capital's inability to offer decent wages. And in other words, it acts somehow as an indirect subsidy to private capital. Because families can go into debt to meet their basic needs, employers, private capital, can afford to pay low wages. So debt is really a compensation for low wages and unprotected jobs. A significant portion of those debt are used to pay for health and education. So in this way too, debt acts somehow as an indirect subsidy to the state. And debt act as a kind of compensation for, again, unprotected jobs and failing health and education services. And last and not least, debt serves the greedy appetites of the financial industry. So let me give you some numbers. Debt service, which is a portion of income used to repay debt. 44% in 2010. I earn 100, I pay back 44. It was 48 in 2016, 68 in 2020. So it gives you an idea of the burden of this debt. And another even more interesting figure is what we call interest debt service, which refers to the portion of income used to pay interest alone. This was an average of 30%. I earn 100, I pay as interest 30, almost 1/3. And the median was 1/5, which also means that some families and some women are more effective than others at managing debt. In other words, just like any other type of work, managing debt can be more or less productive, right? Okay, so to summarize, there is a sexual division of debt, there is debt work, which is another form of unpaid, devalued work, yet highly productive, which sustains the capitalist machinery. Our third argument, and our last argument, is to say that it is the idea of patriarchal debt, which we believe is something constitutive of womanhood. What do we mean by that? Well, you might be wondering, why do lenders choose to lend money to women who have little to no capital or income? And the women I'm talking about are very poor, they have very few income, but almost no capital. And if you open any financial textbook, you will find that normally on paper, lenders lend money to people who have capital or who have income, right? So any classic banking analysis would conclude that those poor women are uncreditworthy. Well, here, it's quite helpful to look into debt through a different angle and to use the lessons of anthropology, philosophy, history. And what does the history tell us? The history of credit and debt show that people who pay back their debts are not necessarily the richest, but rather those who have no other choice, as the consequences for not repaying would be too harsh. And this is what anthropologist David Graeber explains in his very well-known book, Debt, the First 5,000 Years. And he shows in detail how throughout history, peasants, artisans, proletarians, and other oppressed people have consistently made efforts to pay off their debt. While those in power, lords, landlords, rulers, powerful states, and nowadays bankers, sometimes big companies, are much less reliable in honoring their debts. You can find similar arguments in philosophy, starting with Nietzsche or more recently by philosopher Mauricio Lazarotto. And what all those scholars tell us is that the language of debt is often used to justify and reinforce various forms of domination. These authors, Graeber and others, have emphasized how various forms of domination like class or race or religion translate into debt relation, which are very asymmetric. And we argue that gender should also come into the picture. And with this idea of a debt which would be really based on patriarchy. Like if women, by virtue of their status as women, were somehow condemned to expiate debt that they can never repay, as if debt, to turn it differently, as if debt as an obligation was ultimately an ontological condition of womanhood. And remember the testimonial I started with. I described a woman, and I didn't have the time, but I wanted to share 3 testimonies. And the common point was that they were crushed by monetary debt, but also torn by a sense of shame and guilt. And throughout the book, we tell stories about and testimonies about women who not only struggle with debt, but also who feel ashamed and guilt. And they constantly fight against a world that is against them, but also they fight against themselves, constantly calling themselves bad mothers, failed wives, loose women, or even whores. And that's why we believe they keep trying to pay off their debt, no matter what sacrifices they have to make. And what is fascinating, I mean, our last point is the question is, shall we consider that patriarchal debt is just something that happened? Should we be deterministic and take this as a done deal, as something which would happen everywhere, which would be a bit depressing? And what is fascinating with the Tamil case is that the boom of the credit market for Dalit women we have been observed this credit market over the last 20 years. It was not there. When I arrived in Tamil Nadu in the early 2000s, the indebted woman was not there. With my 2 colleagues, we have been observing and documenting the boom of this credit market for 2 decades. And what is fascinating is that the boom of this credit market went along very significant changes in marriage, kinship, and sexual norms. I don't have much time to elaborate, but let me try to explain it. Let me try to be clear. What do we mean by kinship patterns? It's not just about who marries whom, but it's also about property rights, who has access to inheritance and material resources. What do we mean by sexual norms? It refers to how a particular society frame what is considered acceptable and legitimate sexuality, or on the contrary, what is considered as transgressive sexuality. And to make it short, in 2 decades, whereas historically, I have to move my, whereas historically, let's say 50 years back, Dalit women used to be considered economically productive and relatively sexually free. And this was a story like half a century ago. Now, they are primarily valued for their reproductive responsibilities and chastity. This can be described as a process of housewifeization, as sociologist Maria Miss has termed it. Being a housewife is now seen as a respectable status, something that both men and women aspire to for their spouses. And you may ask, well, what the connection with debt, you may ask. Maybe before coming to that point, I don't have the time to elaborate, but just this transformation come from many different factors, but in short, it is very much connected to the decline in agriculture, which used to be primarily a female occupation, as well as the influence of deeply conservative ideologies coming from various sources. So now we have the fact that women are less and less working working and earning and being engaged in paid work. but it's also a kind of ideal. Even though they work, people would like them not to work, right? This is the meaning of housewifeization. And staying at home is something that people, men and women, aspire to. But this has two major consequences for debt. The first thing is that women themselves are seeking debt to compensate for the loss of their economic value. That's a crucial point. And women's debt is not just a top-down process imposed by greedy lenders. From what I've told you so far, you could conclude, well, this women debt is mostly the result of capitalism, with lenders who have understood that women are an easy and docile clientele. That's part of the story, but the story doesn't end here. The other part of the story comes from the women themselves, who are desperate to borrow in order to regain some kind of economic value. Yeah? So here we have to look at the other side of the coin. Before being a debt, a debt is first and foremost a credit, so something which gives you some kind of value, right? And the second consequences is the fact that women follow a very strict repayment ethic related to this feeling of devaluation, uselessness, and inferiority. And honoring their debt is somehow a way of compensating for this feeling. And what is when we go out from the Tamil case, maybe two things. One is I'm not sure I was clear, but maybe we can come back to this in discussion. I've been trying to explain how in 2 decades, womanhood and the norm of femininity has changed dramatically with this idea of housewifeization. Womanhood is always defined in relation to malehood. When womanhood transforms, malehood transforms too. In our case, while Dalit Tamil women are now considered as housewives, at least this is a norm they should achieve, men are considered breadwinners, the one who should make sure that there is food on the table, which means that male respectability requires some kind of financial autonomy. Being a breadwinner means you should be autonomous, independent financially. And here, it also has some strong consequences on debt. While debt used to be a very old practice, going into debt to make ends meet has now become degrading, emasculating, and thus left to women. We can see how all those things connect together. And what is also fascinating is that history seems to repeat itself. Of course, Tamil Nadu is not Victorian England or 19th century France, but in many ways, the Tamil case is very reminiscent of the slow feminization and stigmatization of small credit markets in pre-industrial Europe, described by some historians. And the common point in those very different contexts is the emergence of a specific kinship norm, assigning men the role of breadwinner, financially independent, and assigning women the role of dependent housewives. In both cases, getting into debt to make ends meet become degrading, a sign of incompetence, frivolity, and thus emasculating, and therefore left to women. Right. I'm going to stop here because it's to keep time for the discussion, and maybe just a very last word: the fact that two things. There are a number of anti-debt feminist movements in different parts of the world, and their main claim is to ask who owes what to whom. Those feminist movements come to the same conclusion than us, the fact that in a number of circumstances, in a number of contexts, women bear the most part of household debt, while at the same time, they assume an infinite number of tasks and obligations. So you have these kind of very paradoxical situations where women feel and construct themselves as obligated persons, and the capitalist system draw on this feeling of obligation and to keep the financial machine running. And at the same time, they are constantly fulfilling multiple obligations and services to their families, their children, their husbands, the nation as a whole. So we are really entitled to ask, but who's the creditor and who's the debtor? Shouldn't be the situation reversed? And that's precisely what some feminist movements are calling for. And what we add to this, what we very modestly add to this claim is the fact that this indebted woman really draws on this idea of this concept, this feeling, sorry, of guilt and shame, which stems from the very definition of the woman defined as the other, as Simone de Beauvoir already pointed out, as someone who is necessarily inferior, dispossessed of her individuality and sexuality, and which means that the struggles against debt and campaigns for anti-debt movement really needs to take into account this connection between capitalism, kinship, and sexuality, because it is those things which really keep women trapped into an ontological status of debtor and guilty party. And as long as womanhood remain attached to this feeling, it might be tricky to get out from this from the prevalence of the indebted woman. Well, I'll stop here to keep time for the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Isabelle, also for the perfect timing of your presentation. In the meantime, while you were talking, I put in the chat some links to the book, to your profile, and so on. So this is something that, of course, the student can see afterwards. But in the meantime, there is already a question by Erika Loe. Erika, do you want to switch on your microphone, or shall I read?
Hello. Let me try. Thank you very much, Isabelle. It was very interesting. It's not my field of study, so I apologize if my question is too simplistic, too naive. I know a little bit about the literature on microcredit that is generally seen as a positive tool for women empowerment, especially when we think about India or some African countries. And so I would like to ask you about the relation between your studies and your experiences and this literature. Thank you very much.
Well, actually, Erika, this is a big question because Isabelle has worked on microfinance for many, many years. But anyway.
No, so that is why I'm apologizing.
No need.
Too naive, because this is not my field of study.
It's a very good occasion to have the discussion, especially for the students. Isabelle, just before giving you the floor again, I would like to see whether there are the questions or comments, and then I'll come back to you. If you want to switch on your video in the meantime, you can do it. Lucia, please. Lucia Morosi has another question.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for your very interesting presentation. It's not my field of study too, so maybe my question may be quite naive, but I'd like to know, what do you think about, like, when we talk about access to debt, also in having a gender perspective, what do you think, instead of like having access of some forms of universal basic income as a form to redistribute wealth, and which may be more liberating actually for women? And so the first question is quite naive, and this is this one. And the other is from a sociologist's perspective, maybe, but to what extent, like, for women of non-Western country, having access also to the image of empowered woman may be like supportive in asking for a kind of debt and having access to debt, to what extent this kind of rhetoric may impact on these women, and if there is kind of parallelism with women in Western countries, because you showed that graph showing how household debt is increasing also in Western country. And I think that the sexual division of debt also reflects the sexual division of labor, also the feminization of labor, and so the deterioration of employment and working conditions, especially for women even in Western countries. So I'm really interested in this kind of dynamic on the rhetoric of empowered women between non-Western women and Western women, taking for granted the increase of debt both in Western and non-Western countries. Sorry if I was quite confused.
Thank you, Lucia. So Cesare and Giulia then.
Oh, hi. Thank you very much, Isabel, for the very interesting presentation. I have a question. I mean, I'm also fascinated by the transnational dimension of your analysis, which I think is very interesting, especially when thinking about debt as a kind of, logic to regulate lives across different contexts. So I was wondering whether you found there is a kind of specific rationality of debt that moves these kind of practices and women's attitude across different contexts and also across different, cultural attitudes and moral and religious kind of, contextualizations.
Thank you, Cesare. Giulia, please. Then we give back the floor to Isabella.
So Isabel, thank you so much. It was so interesting. So I just connected with something that you already said. So with, for example, the book of Cavallero and Gago, A Feminist Reading of Debt. And so specifically, they also looking at not only women, but members of LGBTQ plus community. So I was wondering if you have also the opportunity to see this intersectionality and how debt, for example, is different for different kind of women. And also, I mean, coming from also their narrative, they are looking at the situation of Latin America, of course, but also look at the rise of indebtedness for women, looking at the increase in the conservative political forces in Latin America. So do you think that also this political framework of conservative extra right movement that also we have here in Europe coming across, and we are scared about that also for the new elections at the European level. Do you think that the narrative of debt and increasing that in the indebtedness of women and fragiles European citizen is linked with this process that we are experiencing in our lives? And thank you so much.
So the floor is yours now, Isabel. Quite a lot of questions to answer. I invited you to share your video, but I cannot see you, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm
fine.
back. Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you for those very interesting questions, which allow me to go a bit further in certain details. Okay, microcredit. Given that we have to stop in 7 minutes, right? So I have to be quite quick. To make it short,
No, we started at 10, so we have about 10 minutes.
Okay.
Don't worry.
Well, microcredit, it's a long and complicated story, but if I had to make it short, microcredit in a number of circumstances is more part of the problem than the solution, because in a number of cases, unfortunately, it's mostly consumption credit at very expensive rates, which mean that people, and women in particular, since women are favorite clients, according to the few statistics that we have, around 80% of the clients are women. It's very diverse depending upon the continent, but in Asia in particular, and South Asia and India, is a very good case. It's more than 90% of the clients are women. And so consumption loan at very expensive rates, around 30-40% on average, and it can be much higher, especially in South America. At the same time, we should not blame only microcredit for different reasons. The first one is that it would be too simplistic to say microcredit is a big culprit. First, women are juggling with many different sources of loan, and microcredit is only one part of the problem. Second, women are very much in demand, as I was saying. So the microcredit is only the symptom of a bigger problem, which is a growing gap between expenses on the one hand and real income on the other hand, right? What I was saying earlier in my presentation, the failure of private capital to pay decent wages and the failure of states to provide decent protection, right? So you have the literature on microcredit. You have either a very naive vision saying yes, it's very nice, it's empower women, blah blah blah, which is very unrealistic. Then you have a very critical literature saying it's all these people, all these microfinance providers are very are the enemy. Well, I have a very nuanced vision showing that the reality is much more complicated. And the other fact, the other argument to nuance this is that we have microcredit and microcredit. So by and large, the microcredit and it's very clear that you cannot provide good financial services, good quality financial services at affordable rates to poor people because it's costly. So it's very naive to think that you can, on the one that you can have a win-win service. At the same time, you have a number of organizations which are trying to do better and who do their best to provide good quality services. So we should not generalize. Well, this is what I would say regarding microcredits. Universal basic income. Yes, I'm not a specialist, but I definitely believe that in line with a number of feminist scholars, but also someone like the anthropologist James Ferguson, who claim for a right to share, using feminist argument, by the way. And what I've been trying to say in my presentation is that there is really this combination of financial debt and moral debt, with this idea that in a number of circumstances, especially when you have this housewife model, which designate women as dependent and as inferior, it's not always the case. Historically and in different parts of the world, the housewife model is not there. But when this housewife model is there, you really have this idea of inferiority and dependency, which produce women as obligated person and constantly with a constant feeling of shame and guilt, right? We would need more time, and the book tried to elaborate more on that. If you want to know more, you have to read the book. But the connection with the universal basic income is that it recognizes you as someone who deserves, and in that way, I think it can be extremely helpful. The case of Western countries, yes, maybe I've been too quick, but I really want to. I mean, the book really want to get out from the specificity of the Tamil case, and from the very beginning, I, more than my colleagues, really wanted to avoid the kind of comment, oh yes, what you describe is interesting, but it's okay, it's restricted to India. India is very backward and blah 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 blah. I strongly believe, I mean, I've been doing fieldwork in many places, and including in France, and I strongly believe that the indebted woman is in many places. And I mean, let's take the French case, for instance. Who is managing the over indebtedness procedure? Well, there is a specific legal system when you're over indebted. You can ask for legal personal bankruptcy, and who is dealing with that? First, single mothers are much more concerned by this, and second, even when couples are dealing with this kind of legal procedure, women are dealing with this because it's a matter of shame, it's a matter of humiliation, it's a matter of content by bankers or social workers, and women are facing this. Another example, rent arrears in the French context. In social housing, on average, 1/4 of households are on pay late. It's a way for them to manage their cash flow. But when debt collectors try to collect their due, who do they target? Women, because it's always easier to target women, and as if in the mindset of people, again, women are the one who are obligated and who have to pay. Yeah. So yeah, a strong argument of the book is to say that the Tamil case is not unique, and at the same time, the Tamil case was very. I've been doing fieldwork in many places. I've spent a lot of my time over the last 20 years in India, and we have been using the Indian case because this is the one I know the best. But at the same time, I've been also using the Indian case as a demonstration because it was really a way for me and with my colleagues to show how it's kind of laboratory where in 20 years you have this credit market which has boomed like anything, along with very strong changes in kinship and sexuality. And for me, it was a way to conceptually understand the fact that, like many feminist anthropologists have been arguing, like Gail Rubin, for instance, and the fact that if you want to understand patriarchy, you have to connect constantly how systems of accumulation, kinship systems, and sexuality norms co-evolve and evolve and are co-constitutive. Yes, is the word I was trying to find. Yeah, debt to regulate life and specific rationality of debt across contexts, religions. Yeah, you're perfectly right that how shall I say, in a number of circumstances, far beyond patriarchy, debt is really used as a way to regulate social relationships, whether class relationship, whether race relationship, whether religious relationship. If I take religion, for instance, the Christianity is very much based, if you look at Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher, which really looks at Christian morality according to him, is really based on debt relationship, and because it is framed on debt and the fact that believers are debtors, permanent debtors, and this is why, according to him, they follow so strongly religious ethic, because they constantly feel that they are debtors, right? If you move to Hinduism, which is very much based on different sorts of debt, and especially when you are Dalit or when you are a woman, you are permanently indebted to higher caste and to men. And what is interesting in the Indian case is how you have a kind of endless, infinite caste debt that low caste constantly try to get rid of. And we have a number of Dalit social movements, and even very few frame this as that, but when you follow their own logics, you can frame this as a willingness to get out from intergenerational debt, I would say. And the fact that their fathers and grandfathers were constantly indebted financially and morally to local landlords, for instance. So you have in the region where we have been working, you really have a willingness and a trend to get out from those traditional forms of debt, which combine moral debt and financial debt. But what we describe is that it's going on, and it's true that there is a real process through which low caste are able to get out from those traditional forms of debt. But who is paying the price of it? Women. Yeah, it's a bit difficult to explain this more in more detail, but again, if you want to have more details, you can have a look to the book. I hope I have answered your question. And Julia, yeah, LGBT, no, we haven't been looking at this. We haven't been looking at this at all. We are back to our context. We are in a rural context where the LGBT issue is not at all there. It's there in India, but it's for the moment it's more class, upper caste concern. But it does not mean that it's not there, but it's not visible. For us, it was already a big shoot. All those transactional sex that women have been talking about, because we have a full chapter or even 2 chapters talking about how women use their sexuality to build and maintain their credit worthiness, which is a kind of permanent dilemma, because on the one hand, they have to maintain their credit worthiness. On the other hand, they have to maintain a status of respectable wife in a context where you have an increasing control over their bodies. But here again, if we move out from the Tamil context, you can see that the fact that women's bodies is used both as an asset and both as a stigma is something that you can find again and again in different places, in different times of history. And there is this kind of recurring trend about the fact that women's body, whoever we're talking about, is constantly used as something that they try to use as an asset because this is the only thing that they have. And at the same time, they should maintain a reputation of respectable wife, because if you go too far, you are very easily accused of being a whore. And increasing conservative force that Veronica Gago and her co-author talk about also from in Latin America. Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, for me, the fact that this strong connection between women's financial debt on the one hand and women's moral debt on the other is very much reinforced by conservative ideologies who define women only as mothers and wives whose only existence is to serve others. So then it takes different forms depending upon the context, but any kind of ideology which goes in that direction just reinforce this sense of femalehood associated to a feeling of obligation. So yeah, I can only agree to the fact that conservative forces are just reinforcing what I'm trying to explain, and are only reinforcing the very existence of this indebted woman, which according to me is there in many places and in many contexts. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Isabelle. Actually, now the time is really over.
Yeah.
So we thank you so much for being with us. For those of you who can switch on their videos, so we can say bye to Isabelle. Thank you so much. And
thank you so much for the question. It was great. Very interesting question. Yeah.
We look forward to meeting you the next time.
Yeah.
All the best.
All the best to all of you for your project and yeah. Bye.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. 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 Thank you.